Hi, and welcome to the Community Advocate podcast. Today, we're catching up with Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, better known as the ACNC, to many of us, Commissioner Sue Woodward, who has kindly agreed to share some of the insights gained from a recent gathering of international charity regulators that she attended in the UK. Welcome, Sue.
Thanks, Greg, and welcome to listeners.
Always a pleasure. First of all, how did the meeting go? It's a pretty open gambit, but who was there? What was the meeting? What did it entail? But in a general sense, were you happy with what you found?
Yes, I certainly was, Greg. We've been meeting online before we've met in person, and there hasn't been an in-person meeting since about 2019. So now I'm coming up for 2 years in the role. It came at a really great time because I've had enough time in the role to have my own reflections, but also a great time to catch up with people that haven't met face-to-face for quite a while. And some of those people are fairly new in their roles as well. And I think most people would understand that when you do online calls and someone's dialing in at 5 a.m. and other people are on the call at 9 p.m., that even with the best will in the world, it's not the same as having an intensive period of time together in a room face-to-face where you can have all those conversations and you can pick up on the nuance. And we certainly did that over a 3-day period. So to be in the room with regulators with fairly similar roles, so Canada, England and Wales being obviously the oldest regulator, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Singapore, and we also had an observer there on behalf of the state attorneys in the US, so that was also interesting. So to be in the room together, at least having met before, but to be able to be face-to-face was a great success.
That's pretty good. Yeah, it's a pretty good spread, which is the point, obviously, of getting together, as in from the different jurisdictions, to talk about this, like mine but different. Yeah.
And it was very kind of England and Wales to host it. So they provided the venue and the accommodation, and that meant that we were all together in one place, staying in the same place, eating together. So again, that becomes a very rich experience, even though it's quite intense.
It wasn't held in some sort of, 12th century castle in Cardiff or something like that, was it? I don't know where it is. I assume it was London.
Well, it was out of London, and it was in a very beautiful place called Cumberland House, which is in Windsor Park. It is actually itself a charity that has a purpose of bringing people in delegations like this together, and also young people together to have those sort of bigger conversations. So it had a social purpose to the venue as well, which was really lovely. And I can't but say it was a very magical place.
Yeah, well, it's a nice touch that, a bit of colour, the fact that they were the ones that brought it together and made it, happen, the venue. What were some of the issues that were discussed? I know there was a fair bit on the agenda. I did see in the communique that was put out and that the ACNC shared as well. But from what your bit of a broad brush, what were some of the issues that were talked about?
Well, we all had prepared different presentations, so we shared the call on that, and it was based around 4 main themes, which are the sort of core work that we all do, which is around registration. We all wanted to talk more about technology and innovation. There's also a common piece that we're all in the business, if you like, around public trust and confidence, and how do we engage in supporting that objective. And also a core part of our work is compliance, and there are cross-border issues that we wanted to discuss. So they were the 4 main threads, and we did take it in turns to present. So we all went along with our presentations, but there was really great right from the start, people around a table. If you imagine the large kitchen table, it's not a big group of people, very much asking questions, comparing notes, and lots of great links that you make about, I'll put my team in touch with your team on that, because they're working on the same issue at the moment. So that does make it very valuable.
And that's the value, touching on that too, which you did before, that's the value of being in the room. As you say, you do these things online and there's, connections in other ways with your compatriots in other countries, but there's nothing like being in the room to have a discussion like this, is there? It's worth the effort, going to the other side of the world to be able to do that. Yeah.
And I think maybe everyone can relate to the fact that when you actually see people in person, you go, "Oh, you're taller." I had the great pleasure that someone said to me, "Oh, you look younger than you do on screen," which I thought was really lovely.
I get that all the time. Yeah.
So you've got to go with those things, but it does mean that you have a much greater sense of the person and a bit easier to understand and support each other, really, because there's not that many people that have this role in the world. So to speak to someone who really understands the issues that you're facing and what you're trying to do to improve means that there's a great collegiality.
So what were some of the most, sorry, I'll ask that again. What did you present as they went with you had to think about what you were going to present on and you talked about those broad topics, but was there a specific area that you as the ACNC Commissioner talked to in a sense? Or
I also went along with my Assistant Commissioner, Natasha Sekulik, who's the General Counsel, and that was really valuable. Most people, I think all but one, had another person with them, which is also quite helpful because you get more conversations and you remember more things between two people. So we presented particularly on the work and the issues we're facing in registration, and we also did a presentation on our compliance work. But that wasn't to say that we didn't then very actively participate in the other sessions. But obviously, if you did all the jurisdictions on every topic, we wouldn't have had enough time. So it was a really good breakup because often by someone else presenting, you could add in the things that you would have said in a presentation anyway. But it did mean that everyone was well prepared. So people had, really interesting slides and presentations to talk to, which got the conversation going very quickly.
And why those topics in particular? Obviously, they're compliance is a priority area for the ACNC, depending on how you slice it up, and there's a lot of work being done in registrations. Was it something that was particularly resonated with yourselves, or was it easier to divvy it up that way, that's something that you preferred to talk to the table and start the conversation kind of thing?
I don't know that there was any exact science in it. It was really just a bit of a, the hosts sort of divided them up, said people, are people comfortable with this? And I was very comfortable that we talk about those two things because they're obviously really core business. And I think we are, I was interested in some of their reflections on those particular areas for the particular issues that we're facing in both of them. But we could have just as easily talked about what we're doing with technology and what we're doing in the education space. It's hard sometimes you wanted the conversations to keep coming, but you have to have some structure.
Are the issues faced by your regulatory counterparts overseas similar to our own, and how do we compare? Like I know you talked about these different topics, but having been in the room and once everyone has, the meeting is finished, did you find there's a lot of similarity? Like we're sort of facing, I'm always dealing with the ACNC from an Australian perspective, obviously, because where we are, but did you find there's a lot of commonality, or are there some significant differences in different jurisdictions?
There was a considerable amount of commonality, and I think we knew that would be the case before we had the meeting. I think there was also sometimes a bit of envy, like you'd go, "Oh, you've got that power, I wish we had that power." And then sometimes a little bit of like, "Oh, wow, we're actually pretty lucky because we don't have that quirky little thing that's driving you nuts." So we each had quite different legislative frameworks, but there was enough commonality in terms of the issues that we're facing. So, for example, we're all trying to make sure that the registration processes are as efficient and user-friendly and quick as possible. And we're all grappling with the fact that a lot of applications are started but not finished. So, what do you do with those abandoned applications, and how do you make sure that people aren't abandoning them because they don't understand what to do and therefore maybe weren't ready to start, or they just need more help? So there were sometimes issues like that are very common. And then there's, issues around post-COVID, how do we get charities back on track that might have had some greater leniency during COVID in terms of their reporting? And some jurisdictions really finding that quite an issue of how to get organisations back on track with on-time reporting, and what can we do to get that message out. So commonality, but as I say, some other differences where you think, oh, gee, it'd be really handy to have I think if we all sat down and we wrote down the, most desired regulatory powers we could have to do our job in the best possible way, we'd all add and subtract to what we've got. So that's even useful to know in a policy sense, so you can contribute to those discussions when they come up.
Does that document exist, and can you send it to me? That wish list of, or was that done over beer after the meeting, like at the after party, or?
Oh, the after party! I don't.
Is it when you started
It got dark very early, so you'd be sitting around the table and you think, "Oh, I can't wait to go for a walk," because you could see these beautiful autumn leaves outside the window, and all of a sudden it'd be 5 o'clock. You look out and it was pitch black,
yeah,
and you'd missed your window. So I don't know that we would say that we were a group that had a raging after party at all, but and that document doesn't exist. But I think we've got a greater sense of the areas where it can make a difference to have greater regulatory tools.
So what, on that point, what was some of the important outcomes in your eyes? I mean, that's when you said you did get that sense that, but were there concrete, like, you can't boil the ocean, as they say, or as I like to use phrases like that. But were there specifics that came out of it, or more an agreement to work towards certain goals? Like, were there some outcomes with that now we've got a clear idea that we can cooperate on X, or what, there are any examples that you can give, or is it a bit early in that process for that kind of thing?
I think the best way to describe most of the outcomes for us, particularly as the ACNC, is that Natasha and I came away very excited about some small improvements we can make internally in steps and processes, which I know is a bit hard to sort of explain and you don't necessarily see on the outside, but she had spent a deep dive a couple of days before with the England and Wales Commission, both going to their Liverpool office and in London. And, she took a deep dive and, did things like double jacking on their advice line and hearing how they take calls and stuff. So a lot of that stuff is really exciting, and some of it is affirmation of what we're doing, and in some cases what we're doing even better. So it was a sharing. But it's also, she's certainly, I know, full of ideas to come back and think about, could we try that here and how would we do it? But, obviously you need to speak to our staff and work out how it's going to translate here. So there was, what I would say is, so we've come back with both those very practical refinements and improvements that we can talk to the various teams about. And I think overall, there was a really strong commitment to working collaboratively on any global compliance issues that we see, or international, multi-jurisdictional is probably the most accurate way to say it, compliance matters that we see within the limits of everyone's legislation in terms of being able to share data. But we do recognise that there are a lot of organisations that operate multinationally, and there are, at the very pointy end, some very serious issues that we need to make sure we're on top of, so that the vast, vast majority of organisations that are doing the right thing are not going to be tarnished by, serious non-compliance by a few. And I think when you linked up so well at commissioner level, and you've got a real understanding of how that might work, it does support the broader frameworks that we're all signed up to, like the Financial Action Task Force and things like that, which are, global initiatives to prevent money laundering and financing, terrorism financing, for example. Knowing the people that you might need to collaborate with to support those principles and work in that way does make it much more likely that you're going to have an effective outcome.
And there were no, on that point, there were no sort of gaps identified, like that. Right, that framework looks pretty robust. That international cooperation, especially from a investigatory and compliance perspective, like having sort of done a bit of a stock take, as you just explained, that looks in pretty good shape. Like, there were any other opportunities identified, or things that could be done a little better, or it's pretty good.
Well, I think on that most serious side of money laundering and terrorism finance, there's a much bigger piece than just charities. But charities, we recognise that charities can have even unwittingly be caught up in that, and there is within the those guidelines provisions about the not-for-profit sector and so forth. So it was really more a discussion about what our obligations are and how we can play our role, rather than that we identified that there were any gaps at that level at all. And then there's, that's if you like the pointiest, most serious end. It's not the bulk, obviously, of what any of us do. And then there's the other bits that we see where we can be hearing about. And we already have a compliance forum where people are in touch, but looking at, are we seeing bad actors in a certain part of the sector and what's happening, and have we seen that in our jurisdiction? So those sort of conversations are really helpful.
Was there anything to that? I know you can't talk specifics, but were there instances that your counterparts have seen and that we haven't, and it's a bit of a cautionary tale to be on the lookout for that in a general sense, or not particular, or you weren't surprised by any examples they may have thrown up in that regard?
I can't think of anything that I can share. I think it's more the general trends that sometimes there's very great complexity and charities are caught up in that, and as part of a structuring arrangement, and sometimes it's around it is more perhaps locally based around a particular issue or an appeal, but you can see that sort of behaviour rather than the specifics is something, that would be important for us to watch. And I think we're all grappling with the role, making sure that we provide the best regulatory framework so that charities can do their amazing work. And that amazing work does include dealing with global issues, and all of our jurisdictions, we've got the same, I think it's sort of set out quite well in the communique, the issues facing us, organisations, in terms of the cost of living pressures, in terms of the demand they're receiving and how they run their own organisations, the volunteering, changing nature of volunteering and the sort of rates of declining in volunteering or in certain areas of volunteering, the greater number of national disasters and emergencies that charities are responding to, and the changing social tensions and also the global conflicts that are on foot. They're all issues that charities are at the forefront of in many ways, and therefore understanding how that affects each of our individual sectors, but also the commonality, I think, is really helpful.
There's a lot of issues when you lay it all out like that. Charities are just described, the touch points, as they say, in the game. But there are a lot of diversity when you put it all in one neat package like that. There's a lot of areas that, as we know, charities and not-for-profits touch and impact on. Were there, on the meeting, was there anything that the regulators learned from us specifically, like lessons learned? Like, a lot of it was swapping ideas and talking, but was there anything in particular, there was an aha moment for them about how it's done down under, or not particularly?
Well, you do have those really, to be very honest, I did feel very proud of what I could present that we had done. And that's not just obviously things that were done in my time. It's building on the work right from the start. And I think the fact that the ACNC was established as a digital by default agency, so we didn't start with a whole lot of paper forms, for example, has meant that we've been able to lead the way on some of those aspects that others look to us with envy. And I think that's what's a really lovely touch, is that it's almost as though we were able to learn from them in our establishment, so particularly from England and Wales, because they were there for 125 years. We could learn things from them and start ahead of the game because of that. And now, because we jumped ahead, others can sort of look back and say, we had quite a few compliments about the website, for example, and some of the smaller, newer regulators saying, we love your website. You'll recognise things when you look at our website, and that's the best. That's the best thing that you want. And then they talked about one of their proposed safe giving programs. And I thought, wow, that's really catchy. That's really interesting. So you just have a few of those slightly ha-ha moments where both you feel proud that, obviously our website has been regarded as a great place that they all go to, and then other things where you think, oh, that's really interesting. They've just put a different twist on that, and that's really helpful.
No, it's always good. That's, as you say, with the website particularly, that's positive feedback. So I know all the hard work that's gone into getting it to where it is, and other aspects like the portal. And there's, so it is nice to get people to actually acknowledge that, I suppose, isn't it? And say, oh yeah, we like that. It's good. Yeah. So you think know, it's good. Just pivoting to a couple other issues just while I got your time, but then you've been generous with your time already. What did you think of the Senate report into the ATF self-review rollout? I know it's been a long-running issue, and a lot of it's been prosecuted, and we have in the community advocate. But the report itself brought a lot of the criticisms and in fairness, the defence of the ATO of their approach together under one roof. And I know the ACNC made its submission, and you appeared at the public hearing as well. What were your thoughts on the final report that came out with some of those recommendations contained in it?
Well, to the extent. I did appear on the day that I was leaving for the International Regulators meeting, so I managed to do that. I think anything that we can learn from that report and from the submissions made and the people speaking at that inquiry, and I do acknowledge that when you're in the sector, to do any of that work takes a lot of time, so people are doing it from the right place, that they think that there's something important to bring forward. And to the extent any of the recommendations, things that we can support the ATO with or improve on ourselves, we'll certainly look at doing those. Many of the recommendations obviously are not for us and are more even for government, because they require some sort of legislative or other change. But in terms of, we're always, particularly with this measure, because it does affect so many possibly very small organisations that have not had to deal with a regulator really at all. We're really working as hard as we can to get the feedback and to continually analyse the inquiries that we're getting and the common queries we're getting on applications, and working with those peak bodies, trying to tailor the message. We just had a webinar, I think it was yesterday, or might have even been this morning, on reporting to the ACNC for the first time. Now, that came out of the fact that we had organisations saying, well, if we become a registered charity, what does the reporting involve? So, I think we had 600 people register for that. So, being able to tailor that message so people go, oh, well, actually, I understand what that involves, and no, I don't want to do that, so we're not going to register. Or actually, I think we can manage that, that'll be okay, is part of our role at this point.
I know one of the recommendations that was strongly suggested within the report, and it's not the be all and end all of that. This issue was that the process be handed to from the ATO to the ACNC. Do you see, would that be a sensible outcome, or could you see how that could end up playing out? I know it's a political legislative decision, something like that, but would that be something that you would think would be appropriate if it went that way, and would you be able to take it on board?
Well, our name does say not-for-profit, so I guess we can't deny that it has been in the thinking for a very long time, or in the conception of the ACNC. It really is a matter for government, because it would need a resourcing implication as well, and legislative consideration of what powers we had in relation to not-for-profits compared to charities, what was the role. But, we would obviously do what our government mandate is to do, and what the legislation, if it is ever changed, requires us to do.
One last, just on a different issue, tell us about the joint effort with the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, the OAIC, to draft new privacy guidelines for charities and NFPs. I know you work together. How did that come about, and what's the difference that hopefully will make?
Yeah, I'm really pleased about this connection, and we had them speak at our Regulators Day as well. So I think the connection's become very firm, which is great, and they've both reviewed our guidance, and we've given input into their guidance and tried to support them so that they know how to get information out to the sector. So I think that cross-promotion, and so there's sort of no wrong door. If people go to the Privacy Commission, hopefully now they can see charity-specific resources. If they come to us, there's a sort of path that will direct them then to those resources. And, the work that you do directing people as well, it means that people find information in different ways, and hopefully it's clearer. So I think that's a good outcome. And I do think that the lessons that the Privacy Commission have learned from some of the investigations they've done, it's great that they can be then embedded in guidance and tips, and that so the sector knows and can not be caught by surprise and understand what their obligations are and what best practice is too.
Because it's an area that requires constant vigilance in the sense that, from an educative sense, isn't it? That you've got to keep banging the gong to, as you said, to connect people with resources and guidelines, to educate them on what the organisations need to do. Like, it's not a set and forget sort of area, is it? Because it's so pervasive, it keeps evolving, and threats, and yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. And if we think back, a few years, we wouldn't have been having the same conversation, but everyone is so hyped in, all of us as individuals, concerned about, what's happening with our data and people being scammed and, giving data and not realising what purpose it's been used for. And so for charities, it's really about your reputation. So it becomes really, really important, because we all know that your reputation is hard fought for and easily lost. So making sure you have the best possible housekeeping and doing at least the very fundamental steps, so that if something or when something happens, you can assure people that you did, have the right training, have the right data security, you hadn't changed data that you weren't supposed to. Those sort of things are at least going to reassure people, well, they did the best they could, and it was, unavoidable malicious actor that's somehow penetrated, which we know it happens. I think people accept that it can happen. It's just you don't want it to be, because you've missed something very basic and simple.
Thanks, Sue. That was fantastic. For your time again, and for those great insights. And I know you haven't been feeling particularly well, so hopefully you're on the mend. But you sound like you are, which is good. But we really appreciate you taking the time. It was great to catch up and hear that stock take on what's happening in the sector from the regulator's perspective. Thanks, Sue. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Greg. Always a pleasure too.
Join us again next time on the Community Advocate Podcast.